on Twitter, Hannity.com. All right, news continues. Let not your heart be troubled. Tammy Bruce is in the house tonight, filling in for Laura. How are you?
I am good. It's an honor to be handed off from you to me tonight. Thank you, Sean.
Well, have a great show, and don't be nervous. No, I'm kidding. You've been doing this for years.
I won't be, but it's a pleasure. Thank you, Sean. Appreciate it.
Let not your heart be troubled. You're great.
Thank you, dear. Well, I am Tammy Bruce, in for Laura Ingraham this evening, and this is the Ingraham Angle. We begin with a Fox News alert. The spending bill to avoid another government shutdown is on its way to President Trump's desk as we speak. The president is expected to sign the bill tomorrow morning, but he will also use the occasion, finally, to declare a national emergency to get the money for the border wall. The White House believes there is upwards of $8 billion they can tap into to get that wall. We will get into that in a bit. And though she is supposed to have the night off, Laura will be joining us in just a few moments over the phone to give her thoughts on what transpired tonight. You will not want to miss that. But first, we go live to Capitol Hill, where David Spunt has the details on how all of this went down. David.
Well, hey, Tammy, good evening to you. Big night here on Capitol Hill before President Trump signs that legislation in the morning, which we're told he will, as you just mentioned. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi just actually signed it here on Capitol Hill, and now it's on its way to the White House. Let's go over those vote totals, though. 300 yays for that bill, spending bill. 128 nays on that. Now, it was comprised between Republicans and Democrats, the majority of Democrats. Now, the Senate passed the measure 83-16 earlier today. Spent most of the day in the Senate speaking, and senators had mixed feelings on the president getting ready to declare a national emergency. Majority Leader Mitch McConnell made it clear today that he had assurances from President Trump that the bill would be signed. This bill calls for $1.375 billion for new border barriers. That's enough for 55 miles of fencing along the Texas-Mexico border. Now, there are several provisions. One is that the Department of Homeland Security must discuss any new construction with local leaders before that construction of the wall takes place. This is an issue that specifically puts somewhat of a wedge between Republicans. Senators Lindsey Graham and Richard Shelby are both calling the wall money a down payment.
Consider this a down payment and find the difference between 1.375 and 5.7 through executive action. Some of it can be done by accessing existing accounts without a national emergency declaration. Most likely, we can't do it all without a national emergency. I think he will go the national emergency route because he has to.
But other Republicans like Susan Collins from Maine and actually John Cornyn, the senior senator from Texas, they said that they don't know if a national emergency was really the best way to do this. Senator Cornyn seeing some of those immigration issues down there. Meanwhile, on the Democratic side in the House, progressive Democrat from New York, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she actually voted no on the package, Tammy, because she said that it funded the Department of Homeland Security. And she has called specifically for a defunding of immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE. That's why she voted no there. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi earlier today felt very confident about this. She said she believed that they would have the votes, the Democrats would have the votes. Also, House Speaker Pelosi didn't rule out any potential legal challenges if President Trump, I should say when President Trump declares a national emergency. However, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders said earlier today that the White House is ready for any legal challenges. Again, that bill on its way to the White House right now, 1,159 pages. President Trump's team going to be working all night, and he will sign it tomorrow morning, we hear. Tammy.
Yes, as someone once said, it takes a village, apparently, to read bills now. Yes, David, thank you very much. And now joining me via phone is the host of this program, Laura Ingraham. Laura, welcome to your program. Thank you so much for calling in for us.
Hey, Tammy, I'm winding my way through the mountains of Colorado, so if it cuts in and out, sorry about that. But look,
sounds nice.
I just got off the phone with a White House source, and he said that, and this is their point, they were really in a no-win situation here. They had to sign this because if they didn't, pain inflicted on the American public, pain inflicted in the way that we saw unfold before. A lot of frustration, however, from the White House about these provisions that were slipped in the writing process of this legislation. Remember, it only is good until the end of September, the end of this fiscal year. So this is not a forever thing, but it is still very frustrating. The provision which I've been tweeting about and speaking about on my podcast today, Tammy, is the provision that gives presumably, it seems like de facto shielding from deportation of any potential sponsor of any illegal immigrant kid who comes across the border. Now, that conceivably could be like second cousin twice removed if you read the language, gives a lot of discretion. But I'm assured tonight that the Department of Homeland Security is going to be extremely stringent in the way they interpret that provision, that they will not allow some wholesale de facto amnesty to be instituted through this provision. So they insist that that is not something that the American people should worry about, and they are absolutely confident that they're going to be able to get billions for this wall and build, perhaps as much as 200 miles of the wall in critical places in the United States with this, with the emergency fund, 1.5 billion, and then with more money coming from this interdiction sources from, drug trafficking.
Laura, you're breaking up just a little bit. I do want to ask you, though, in this process, the president is going to realize here that this is going to be par for the course. It is remarkable that this kind of bill went through and was approved of by the Republicans, considering these landmines that are in it. He must realize that it's always going to have to be not necessarily a compromise, but that he's going to have to always be working for us and against the establishment to get things done. All right, so it might be those canyons in Colorado. All right, well, so we've lost Laura. Great, enough time, though. Great analysis and summary right there for us with her conversation with someone, her sources certainly in the White House. But we will be back with Laura in just a minute as she comes through to another better cell area. But let's go now. Joining me live from Capitol Hill, Congressman Ken Buck and Congressman Paul Gosar. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Obviously, a very busy night for all of us. But you heard Laura and her description of how the White House felt about this, that effectively their hand was forced, that this was not really a great situation, but they feel they can work with it. But let me ask you, certainly, Congressman Buck, how is this really a bipartisan framework? I mean, there are so many things that we don't get. It is not really exactly what the president wanted. It's in some ways can be considered embarrassing, certainly dangerous for immigrant communities because it limits what ICE can do, or at least it tries to limit what ICE can do when it comes to detaining and deporting individuals. How would you describe this as being a win for the Republicans and for the president, if you can?
Well, first, I want to thank Laura for being in Colorado and spending her money in Colorado. I appreciate that very much. This is not a bipartisan bill. This is an institutionalist bill. This is a group of people that are doing their very best to thwart this president and to stop good American policy, and they're acting in a way that both Republicans and Democrats, Republicans and Democrats want to see. They're spending too much money. They are stopping border security. They are hampering ICE's efforts to make sure that this country is safer. And they're also stopping our ability to interdict drugs that are coming into this country while we have a very serious heroin problem in this country. So they are undermining our ability to protect Americans.
It certainly seems that way. And I have to ask you, Congressman Gosar, your experience there, you're there with, Arizona is your state.
Yes.
This seems to be a remarkable dynamic. In fact, that I don't know who is really, other than perhaps the White House, who will have even read this bill, knowing exactly how perhaps dangerous it is in certain aspects. What do you feel about that and the impact on the border states, the states that are immediately impacted?
Well, you are exactly right, Tammy. I mean, less than 24 hours to read 1,000 pages is physically impossible. Now, once again, it's the same mantra of the establishment here. Jam you to the end of the week and throw a 1,000-page bill at you to take it or leave it. That's the wrong way about going about this. This affects my state because over 40% of the drugs coming into this country come through Arizona. So you need collaboration. You need border walls. You need more beds. You need to have ICE that's dynamic, Border Patrol agents that are paid fairly and empowered. But all of that is restricted in this bill, so it doesn't help us. It actually hurts us.
Oh, see, and this is why, obviously, we know everybody is obsessed with the president's approval rating, which, again, today, according to Rasmussen, is at a lovely 50%. Congress can't say the same thing. You're between like 8 and 13% approval. Americans don't like when this happens. We've seen it over and over again. But this is life and death. And I have to say, especially for the immigrant communities, documented or not, these are things that make towns, well, like Lawrence, Massachusetts, where Elizabeth Warren announced her run for the presidency, is a sanctuary city. Is a hub, as one U.S. attorney noted, is a hub for opioids to be distributed throughout New England. Those lives are ruined, the lives of the people who have to deal with that environment in their towns. And so this is the responsibility of Congress. It's all of our responsibility. And we see this game continuing to be played when it seems to be very clear about what needs to be done. Congressman Gosar, let me just ask, though, this has been going on for so many years. This seems to be no different. Why is it no different for people in Congress? What influence have the Republicans not had in helping to make a change here in how things are done?
Well, actually, there was a change here, Tammy, to the wrong side. This basically supercharges child trafficking, because now what you're going to see is a precedent-setting application where those people associated in a house or a holdings with an unaccompanied minor will be off limits. And we will be stretching HHS to make that discernation as to who there is applicable to ICE. This is a nightmare for what's coming.
Well, but see, this is what's confusing. Congressman Buck, if I can ask you, the Republicans, this was a bipartisan commission that came together to deliver this solution for the American people. And it's awful. How is it that the Republican leadership and Republicans in Congress, in the House and the Senate, all these people come together and come up with something that pretty much doesn't, I mean, it's a game, it seems. How is it that Republicans can approve of what they've just put forward to the president?
So this is a conference committee that's made up of appropriators. Appropriators have different DNA than the rest of us in Congress. They are born to spend money. They have put us $22 trillion in debt, and they continue to put us in debt at a rate of $800 billion a year. We will be close to $1 trillion a year in the next fiscal year. And that's one of the main problems with this bill. We don't have people that are like Paul Gosar, who are feeling the effects of this policy with ICE every day.
Well, we're all feeling it, certainly. And Congressman, I want you to stay right there. I appreciate you being with us. I do want to bring back Laura quickly. Laura, welcome back. I don't know if you've heard this conversation, but continue on with what you were saying.
I did. Well, Tammy, look, this is a situation that the American people listening all across this country have to know tonight. Congress is responsible for this situation.
Exactly.
With the record number of people crossing the border. When they say there's no crisis, they're lying to the American people. 1,800 family units crossed the border on Monday when the president was in El Paso. 300 of them, two groups of 300, according to the Washington Post and DHS, crossed on Monday. That's a crisis. This bill does nothing to address that. It's an easy fix. We're gonna. I know on the show you're gonna play some of what I said last night for people to listen to again. It's an easy fix. But this was totally unnecessary. The president's instincts on this has always been right. Simple, pragmatic thinking, Tammy.
Indeed, and he clearly is a man alone in a way, right, Laura? Obviously, he's made every effort to compromise. People will remember the State of the Union. He seems to be in Washington the one person who's thinking about us, who's thinking about the future, who's not thinking about his next job or what the media is going to say. He is genuinely a man alone in facing what this swamp is putting forward to him.
Well, and I would say this. I think the Democrats were the ones who were willing to inflict pain on the American public. The president, I think it irked him to have to do this, but the president did not want to put the country through in this economy through the uncertainty of another government shutdown.
Right.
Okay. That is it's a terrible position for him to be. It's like a Damocles sword hanging over the economy. He doesn't want that to happen. Okay. So he decides to do, sadly, which is the only card he has left, which is the national emergency. The Democrats pushed him into this situation, Tammy. It was completely unnecessary, and the president did the right thing here. He had to do this. This will be expedited to the Supreme Court. the Supreme Court is going to have to make a decision about whether the president's constitutional authority extends to this type of situation regarding the border. I think it's a no-brainer. He absolutely has the constitutional authority to do this. Nancy Pelosi's comments about this earlier today were ridiculously stupid. She doesn't know what she's talking about. This will be affirmed by the court. They just have to get to the court, Tammy, and then they'll be off to the races. But look, this is not the way any of us wanted this done. And I'm really unhappy with a lot of what's in this bill. It's not what we wanted. The president should have done this in the first 100 days of his term. But you can blame the pros in Congress for screwing that up.
Well, you know, and he really was trying. I mean, this was a man who started his term really trying to work with the system, you know, being the compromiser, bringing people in. And obviously, these last 2 years have been an education for all of us. And the president has put this off. And now he clearly realizes, I think this is important for the American people to see what Congress really is doing, what the Democrats are made of, and what the president has stated from the beginning that he continues to focus on. I think it's valuable because I don't think this is going to end for the next 6 years. I think this is going to be the constant fight.
Now, Tammy, this is going to be the election year issue.
Yeah.
We thought this was going to be settled. We thought it could be settled. But the Democrats are bowing down at the altar of open borders. This is a religion to them. They believe this is Tammy, their religion. They don't believe in the old nation state. They think nations are passé. They think our sovereignty is something to be, it's fungible, it's tradable. And Donald Trump doesn't believe that. He thinks America is a special place and it should remain that way.
Yeah, that's
what he believes.
Almost on the coattails of the Barack Obama attitude that America's strength and specialness was the problem. They want to carry that on. We've seen the results of a man, Donald Trump, who thinks the opposite, and the world is reaping the benefits of that. Laura, great stuff. Thank you so much for joining us on your vacation. I appreciate it. And thank you for letting me keep your chair warm here. Your comments were obviously...
Have a great show. And everybody make their views heard to Congress and do not take your eye off this ball.
Yeah.
This is for the whole shooting match. This is our country at stake.
This is it. Great stuff. Thank you so much, Laura. It's what we needed to hear. I want to bring back Congressman Ken Buck and Paul Gosar. Obviously, Congressman Buck, some very strong words. We see this as being an extension of not just the next 6 years, but it's what the election's going to be about. How do you think the Republicans do you see at least the Republicans in the Senate being a bit more helpful to the president, and certainly the Republicans in the House of Representatives being more helpful to his agenda as well, which is at this point clearly the only agenda set for the American people?
I think the American people respect strength. I think President Trump is showing strength on this issue. He has a clear vision for protecting Americans from dangerous illegal immigrants as well as from drugs. And I think the national emergency in this case is the fact that Congress can't act. That's an emergency. We need to make sure that we take care of that. And I applaud this president for taking a strong stand and making sure that all Americans understand that we have a border and we need to enforce our border security.
Do you have any concerns at the same time? We know we've got, I think, about 30 existing national emergencies that are in order in the United States. We know President Clinton, I believe, issued 17. President Obama issued, I believe, 12 or 13. So this is something that happens and is never a drama, and people probably haven't been aware of the national emergency orders that have been implemented. But we heard from the Democrats that they say, oh, well, then we're going to do we can do this on other issues. Do you think that the Democrats need the permission of the Republicans and what they do to do what they're going to do? Do you take that threat seriously?
The Democrat presidents have never been bound by the law. When you look at how the presidents, President Obama, President Clinton, President Carter, treated the Antiquities Act or the Emergencies Act, they have always expanded the scope of presidential power. This president is much more limited in the scope and acting on a true emergency.
Congressman Buck, do you agree? Congressman Buck, you get the last word. Do you have any concern about the national emergency declaration?
I do, but here's the deal. The thing that the president has at his disposal is about $4.5 billion without even touching the emergency clause. So, you know, Congress
let's
is
get it
actually
all.
given that. It's ready to rock and roll, and I think this president was betrayed by a lot of people here in Congress.
Yeah, well, the president knows what he needs to achieve, and he's looking out, I think, for the American people. He's going to find a way to make that work. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us tonight on a very busy night. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, coming up, we go live to the White House for the latest on President Trump's expected declaration of a national emergency to get a border wall built.
Trump's only sin is that he's enforcing the law. And if you don't like the law, you ought to change it. I don't join with my colleagues in believing that if the president does this, when he does it, he's declared he's going to do it, that will be the end of Western order. I don't believe that.
All righty, that was Louisiana Senator John Kennedy earlier today saying that he supports President Trump declaring a national emergency in wake of the watered-down border security bill. But critics are already chomping at the bit to challenge any action he takes. Ellison Barber is live at the White House tonight with the late-breaking developments. Ellison.
Hi, Tammy. A senior administration official tells Fox News that President Trump is going to announce $8 billion for that border wall, his long-promised border wall, and that he will use executive actions in order to move around and free up that money from various federal agencies. The senior administration official also says that the president will declare a national emergency. When it comes to that funding bill, they say they're not exactly sure when they will receive a physical copy of it here at the White House. But at this point, I'm being told that they expect President Trump to sign it tomorrow morning. There are, of course, still more details that we will get throughout the night, and of course more tomorrow morning. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders had told reporters earlier today that more details would be coming. And in a statement, she said this, quote, President Trump will sign the government funding bill, as he has stated before. He will also take other executive action, including a national emergency, to ensure we stop the national security and humanitarian crisis at the border. The president is once again delivering on his promise to build the wall, protect the border, and secure our great nation. But the Department of Justice reportedly warned the White House that a national emergency declaration will almost certainly be blocked by the courts. According to a new report by ABC News, DOJ is telling the White House it's nearly certain that the courts step in and block this, quote, preventing the immediate implementation of the president's plan to circumvent Congress and build the wall using his executive powers, at least temporarily. President Trump has repeatedly said if he takes the national emergency route, he expects legal action to follow. This afternoon, the White House said they're ready for it. But Press Secretary Sarah Sanders also said that there should not be any of that sort of action because, in her words, the president is doing his job and Congress should do theirs. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy says he spoke with President Trump this evening. According to Leader McCarthy, the president feels good about the funding bill, though one source tells Fox News earlier in the day the president was very conflicted about certain sections of the legislation. Tammy?
Ellison, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
This could all stop tomorrow if Congress did what it should do tonight. All asylum applications should be filed outside of America. Secondly, the law must be changed to allow for immediate border turnbacks. Third, one illegal border crossing and you're out. You're back home, and that means back to zero tolerance. And finally, prosecute more adults for child endangerment.
All righty. Well, that was Laura here on The Angle last night, as she mentioned, with her advice to fix the border security bill. Joining me now, Tom Homan, former acting director of ICE and now a Fox News contributor, and Hector Garza, a Border Patrol agent and vice president of the National Border Patrol Council. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me on this very important night. Let me ask you, Mr. Garza, clearly this is an argument about whether or not there's an emergency. We know in 2017, over 70,000 Americans died of overdoses, primarily due to opioids, fentanyl and heroin. That is more than the 58,000 people who died in all of the years of the Vietnam War combined. 1 year, 70,000 Americans dead from drugs that come primarily 80 to 90% from the southern border. Is that not an emergency, sir?
Clearly, it's a humanitarian crisis and it's an emergency. What we see right now is between ports of entry, we see a lot of dangerous drugs. And what you have to consider is that between ports of entry, that those are considered unsecured location, unlike ports of entry. Ports of entry are secure locations with technology and manpower. between ports of entry, we don't have that technology. We don't have that manpower. And yes, it is a crisis, and President Trump should declare an emergency.
Well, and see, you see this every day. The men and women you represent see this every day. Mr. Homan, you know, your experience, too, I think is invaluable here in that there's arguments from the Democrats who say, well, most of this comes in through the secured port of entries. What does that tell you about, but even if it was true, what does that tell you that what happens with the unsecured areas if all of these drugs, if they, as they argue, are coming in from the ports of entry? All the more reason why we would need the wall, correct?
Look, the Democrats are twisting the story. What the fact is, more drugs are seized at the port of entry because every car is stopped. Every person is talked to. So, of course, they're going to find more drugs because they got better security. That doesn't mean drugs aren't coming across between the ports of entry, because there's places where cars can drive through to barbed wire fencing. They can be smuggled on backpack. So, of course, more drugs arrested at the port of entry. That's why we need security between the ports of entry so we can arrest more of that. I mean, they just turn that story around against American people. Again, it's that false narrative they send that drugs don't come across that border. You got a Border Patrol agent sitting there with you. When I was a Border Patrol agent, well, I had 221 kilos in the truck to come across a barbed wire fence.
Yeah, and
it happens.
There's Mr. Garza, there's this attitude also of like what we find or what we interdict is all that's coming over. The problem is what we don't know. And what we know that border walls that do exist, what they've stopped, over 90% of the illegal activity. Can we expect that with what we're going to be building now, with whether it's the Rio Grande or wherever the president needs to start?
So first of all, this border bill is not good for border security. It's actually very, very bad. If you look at the 55 miles of border wall that were approved in this border bill, the language in there restricts of where we can build that border wall. As a matter of fact, in the Rio Grande Valley, those are areas that are very, very busy, where drugs are coming across and very dangerous criminals. Now, think about this, Tammy. We have about 4 agents that encounter about 300 illegal aliens out there. That part of the border is not secure anymore because those 4 agents now have to go in and process those illegal aliens.
Great point. And of course, now what we're dealing with here is this framework of the national emergency and at least allowing us to then approach this in a much more aggressive way. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it. Coming up, breaking details, raising new questions about the alleged MAGA attack on Empire actor Jussie Smollett. A live report on a story that is getting crazier by the minute. Plus, new details about a group of rogue FBI leaders, an extraordinary development, trying to take down President Trump. House Intelligence Committee ranking member Devin Nunes joins me live with Can't Miss Reaction. Tonight, there are some conflicting reports about the alleged MAGA attack against Empire actor Jussie Smollett last month in Chicago. The developments are coming in by the minute. Jonathan Hunt is live in our West Coast newsroom to tell us what they are. Jonathan.
Good evening, Tammy. For some time now, multiple law enforcement and city officials have been telling our own Chicago-based reporter Matt Finn that Jussie Smollett's story of an alleged attack appeared to be a hoax. They based that apparently on not having found evidence of an assault, even after looking at hundreds of hours of security camera video recordings from the area. Nonetheless, with the investigation ongoing, we have been circumspect in our reporting. But tonight, local Chicago media outlets are reporting Chicago police are indeed investigating whether Jussie Smollett may have staged the attack along with 2 men who worked with him on the set of the Fox TV show Empire, and those 2 who are now being questioned by investigators. Now, earlier in the investigation, police released grainy images of 2 persons of interest, and Chicago police today confirmed they detained 2 men last night. They also searched their homes. The CBS TV station in Chicago is reporting that the attorney for those 2 says he expects charges sometime tomorrow afternoon. And another station, ABC 7 Chicago, also reporting that police are looking into whether the entire incident was a hoax, although the Chicago Police Department's chief communications officer tweeted tonight, quote, "Media reports about the Empire incident being a hoax are unconfirmed by case detectives. Superintendent Eddie Johnson Johnson has contacted ABC 7 Chicago to state on the record that we have no evidence to support their reporting and their supposed CPD sources are uninformed and inaccurate. Now, ABC 7 Chicago also said Smollett may have been motivated to organize the alleged hoax because he was being written off of Empire. But 20th Century Fox Television released a statement tonight saying, quote, "The idea that Jussie Smollett has been or would be written off of Empire is patently ridiculous. He remains a core player on this very successful series, and we continue to stand by him." Smollett's spokesman told us simply, "These are ridiculous rumors." Smollett's story that he was attacked on a dark Chicago street by two men shouting racist and homophobic insults has not changed since the alleged assault was first reported. But going back to our own Matt Finn in Chicago, he tells us tonight, Tammy, that Chicago detectives continue to question Smollett over whether or not this story is real or fake.
Wow.
Tammy?
Well, great reporting. Thank you. Obviously still complicated, and eventually we might get right down to the details of the matter. Thank you, sir. Also tonight, fired FBI Acting Director Andrew McCabe making an astonishing admission about the unprecedented effort by himself and other top Justice Department officials to try to take down President Trump.
I was very concerned that I was able to put the Russia case on absolutely solid ground in an indelible fashion, that were I removed quickly or reassigned or fired, that the case could not be closed or vanish in the night without a trace. I wanted to make sure that our case was on solid ground.
Remarkable. Even if you don't like President Trump, shouldn't most Americans be at least a little concerned about what McCabe just admitted there? And let's not forget, McCabe is just one of several rogue FBI agents, no longer in a position because of their dangerous behavior. That includes Comey, Strzok, Page, and James Baker. Here now, House Intelligence Committee Ranking Member Devin Nunes. Congressman Nunes, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
It's been a busy day, busy news day on Valentine's Day.
It has indeed. And look, there's a weird kind of disconnect, right? A cognitive dissonance here of a man who is, for some reason, saying that because he might be removed at some point, he would have to try to make sure this investigation didn't go away, as though he was running the FBI by himself in a garage. What is your take on the seriousness of this, considering it's a remarkable admission about the highest levels at the Justice Department conspiring, if you will, to reverse a presidential election? What can you say to our viewers tonight about this?
So that's the first time I heard that clip in its entirety. The first word that comes to me is a bunch of gibberish. What is he saying there, right? I mean, what actual evidence did you have that the Trump campaign was colluding with Russians? You had none. They had zero. The only evidence that they had was the evidence that the Clinton campaign had got from Russians and had delivered to the FBI that McCabe knew had come from the Clinton campaign and Strzok and all the others. At that time, when he's talking that gibberish about how he's going to make sure that this investigation continues, we already know that the lead investigator, Peter Strzok, has said that there's going to be no there there. That, in other words, there's not going to be any collusion. So that's essentially what I think of it.
Well, he also noted in part of this interview that will be, I guess, on another network on the weekend, is that he was shocked by it was Comey's firing, and he was then afraid that, well, if something happened to him, this is what he wanted to try to reinforce what this investigation was. We know that you can fire an FBI director, and there's many layers of leadership in that agency, at the Department of Justice. These are not single individuals who are in charge. It makes no sense to say that you went out of your way. And this is a man who's now has been referred to the Justice Department for charges based on his lying to Congress about his own actions to cover up his own behavior. And yet he keeps pointing at the White House and the president as being the problem, in addition to conspiring with other people there to remove the president from office in a remarkable way.
Yeah, I think that's the key term that you just used there, is that they conspired early on in 2016 to open a counterintelligence investigation into a political campaign.
Right.
So that is where they definitely did conspire. And then they pushed this, so much so that they got a FISA warrant on an American citizen. It came up totally empty. They got nothing. It was renewed 4 times. This continued on into 2017 after President Trump was sworn in.
Yeah.
And then a small cabal there decided that
well, is it small?
Donald Trump
that's the
shouldn't
other
be
point.
president.
That's the other point that we all have to consider and wonder about as we must investigate this. How small was it? Is this just the tip of the iceberg? This was happening and Americans did not know. It would have been the usurpation of an American presidency illegally from at the highest levels of our Justice Department. That is what I think should concern the American people here. Obviously, we're going to be learning more. Thank you, sir, for joining us tonight. I appreciate it.
Thanks,
busy day. Appreciate it. Coming up, Senator Bob Menendez threatens to call the cops on a reporter just for doing his job. That reporter joins us exclusively coming up next. Back in August, the Boston Globe gathered more than 300 of its like-minded editorial boards to scold President Trump with his quote about his quote frequent attacks on the media. So there will be surely a similar campaign, we believe, for this gross attack on the press.
I'm wondering why you won't answer questions on the New Green Deal.
I won't answer questions to the Daily Caller, period. You're trash.
Why do you think we're trash, sir?
Don't keep harassing me.
Well, in case you missed it, that was Senator Bob Menendez threatening to call the coppers on Daily Caller reporter Henry Rogers because he didn't like the questions being asked. That reporter, Henry Rogers, joins us live right now. Henry, have you heard from the senator's office or any reporters about this?
Well, it's funny, actually. His communications directors tweeted about this shortly after it went viral, after this clip went viral, after he would not speak to my intern, Paul Ingraham, and I, and threatened to call the police on us. So actually, they tweeted out the article in support of Senator Menendez's comments.
Yeah, you know, this is particularly troubling, though. I mean, he got particularly hostile when he found out that you weren't legacy media. That you were, it was, you know, that was the reason why not. What do you think he has a problem with? Obviously, conservative media or the Daily Caller in particular. What do you think?
Well, we broke a story about him a couple of years ago, which led to an investigation, which basically found him guilty of hiring underage prostitutes. So I understand why he might not like us or the Daily Caller that much, but that's no reason for him to threaten to call the police on me for asking a fair question, a softball question, about the Green New Deal.
Yeah, Henry, absolutely, I agree with you. I don't believe he was found guilty. I think that there was a hung jury and they dropped charges ultimately. But bottom line is, he didn't like questions being asked, and he's a lawmaker threatening to call the cops on a reporter. Certainly a little bit of hypocrisy there. Henry, thank you very much. I want to point out for all of you, in fact, the media hypocrisy in all of this. This is the leftist media when they don't like something that Trump says.
No president in the U.S. has done what he is doing, which is single out, political enemies, lump them in with the media.
The President of the United States repeatedly calling the press the enemy of the people.
President Trump says the media are responsible for the country's angry political climate, ignoring his own hostile rhetoric.
He really hates the news. He hates us.
All right, but when a member of the conservative media gets attacked, well, that obviously doesn't count as much of the same, certainly, as we saw in that last segment there with Henry. Joining me now is former Tennessee Congressman Zach Wamp and Democratic strategist Scott Levinson. Scott, so why does the left only really defend the media when or the freedom of the press in general when it's convenient for them? Do you see it that way? I would think you probably don't.
I obviously don't, honey, but I think the real issue is we're creating parallels where they don't exist. The issue with the president is he's created a hostile work environment. It's a safety issue. We had a cameraman assaulted last week. He's removed press passes and kept people from the people's house, the White House. So the fact that on the president's side, we have a safety issue, not just a politician not wanting to answer questions. That happens every day in this country.
Certainly, but you can say no to answering a question without saying you're going to call the police on someone. You don't think that creates a security issue or sends a signal to Americans that reporters should be arrested if they dare to ask a question?
As far as I know, the Capitol Police weren't called. They weren't answering themselves.
But he threatened it.
The halls of Congress are a public zone, and the press have a right to that public zone. The People's House keeping press from the White House? It's the People's House.
Well, keeping press is not the same. Is not the same as simply asking for a different reporter to represent an entity. And I understand what you're saying, but I think that the president's powerful, a senator's powerful. Zach, what's your take on this?
So what's good for the goose is obviously not good for the gander. But on the big issue here, and the reason the president can get away with saying fake news. Remember, Walter Cronkite said that the media is actually the fourth branch of the federal government. Mm-hmm. That scares a lot of Americans. Who gave them that kind of power?
Well, it's an important role, though. It is.
It's an important role.
It is an important role. And when they've abdicated their job, it negatively affects our democracy.
If the media and journalism is not done without fear or without favor and stays objective, they lose credibility. They've lost so much credibility that the president can say fake news and it resonates with the American people.
Zach, that is why I wanted to distinguish between the credibility of the news and the safety environment. Yellow journalism has existed since the 1890s in this country. People have critiqued the credibility of the media.
Yeah.
But when you start to put the press in danger, when they start to have to be in fear of doing their job, that's when you have a
But this becomes a difference also between the president issuing an opinion of the media, that it is the enemy of the people or that it's fake. That's an opinion. I would argue also, if the president came out and said a reporter should be arrested for asking him a question he doesn't like.
There was an assault of a cameraman at a rally with the president last week. An assault. So if he's encouraging this type of aggression towards the news reporters, how could they possibly do their job?
I think it's a bit specious to suggest that what the president's saying, considering what the media says about Trump supporters, what the media says every single day, what Americans hear. I mean, the media is out there to be heard by all Americans. To suggest that somebody who, within an encounter, an exchange with a cameraman, that's the president's fault. That's one of the problems here, is that not everything is President Trump's fault. This is, I think, why people begin to have a question about the veracity of media and their attitude and what they're trying to promote.
Tammy, we have a trust problem. The Congress needs to restore their trust problem. Frankly, Senator Menendez needs to restore his trust problem. And the media needs to restore their trust problem. And then the country would actually have more trust, more faith.
Well, and we're seeing it also affected in the ratings, right? You've got networks that are being beaten by ancient aliens, because they're not trusted so much.
Right.
People don't necessarily need to agree with everything they hear. They want to know why you're saying it, get some background so that they can make up their own mind about the nature of what's occurring. And we can't conflate having an opinion with suggesting or threatening to have someone arrested. I mean, that is, and when you actually could do it in the Senate, you would agree that that was an inappropriate thing to say to that reporter.
I mean, again, I don't know that the Capitol Police were even called in this case, Tammy.
But it would be like you going in and threatening to kill someone. But it's like, I didn't kill him, even though I threatened to kill him. You don't get away with that.
I just don't think it's analogous with the violence we saw.
But in this country, we should be able to disagree without being enemies.
Well, we used to be able to do that. We'll get back to that at some point, I do believe. All right, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with a very special Valentine's Day Last Bite. It's time for the Last Bite. It's Valentine's Day, and love is in the air. That is 21-year-old Diego the Dolphin spreading love to two of his trainers. And if you ever hear that, someone might call the police. You don't ever want to squeak like that. That is all the time we have for tonight. I'm Tammy Bruce, in for Laura Ingraham. My thanks to all of you for watching. You can learn more about me at tammybruce.com. And as president of Independent Women's Voice, visit iwv.org. Shannon Bream and the Fox News at Night team take it from here.
Baseball today. It's the American way. Of course, the next best thing to a seat in the stands is a seat in front of a 19-inch RCA Victor television. One more day to Labor Day weekend, the traditional occasion for tasty outdoor barbecues or picnics.
Agree with all the obstacles and with all the enemies who are between me and
This is Times Square, 42nd